Welcome to the Climate Action Studio at COP24 in Katowice. The Climate Action Studio is a platform that brings voices from all stakeholders, NGOs, IGOs, UN agencies, and government representatives on tackling and combating climate change and the action taken on the ground. Today, we have with us a guest who needs no introduction. He has served as the 45th Vice President of the United States of America and is a very well-known and active environmentalist. It's an honor to have you, sir.
Oh,
Mr.
thank
Gore.
you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. We'll proceed with the interview as we discussed. And Mr. Gore, in your presentation yesterday to the COP participants, you showed very vivid examples of how climate change results in the most dramatic or drastic weather events across the globe and around the world. And you illustrated very clearly how this came about by, or was caused by climate change. At the point when the audience felt a bit depressed and felt hopeless, you turned the table around. You gave some very uplifting examples of how activism and innovation has turned the tide, and how it charted a way forward, and how it provided an option for policymakers who chose to do the right thing in addressing climate change. So my question to you is, why do you think these contributions of non-party stakeholders are so important?
Well, there are several reasons why their contributions are so important. In some countries, take the United States of America, for example, when the national leadership turns toward climate denial, then governors and mayors and business leaders step up to fill the gap. And because the opportunities for cheaper electricity from renewable sources and more efficient approaches to business by adopting much higher levels of efficiency that come out of this sustainability revolution prove themselves, they're able to move very quickly. California, for example, if it were a nation, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world, and they've already gone they've passed a law taking them to zero carbon by 2045, and California has a record of doing what it says it will do. But I think there's also a second reason why these contributions are so important. In many countries around the world, my impression is that some powerful and wealthy special interests have learned how to develop an unhealthy degree of influence over national governments, but citizens and activists and committed business leaders and NGOs are better able to put the facts before local leaders and regional leaders, and they make more progress there. So I'm heartened by it and encouraged by it, and I want to share that news with others.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gore, you also spoke yesterday of the impact of climate change on Poland.
Yeah.
And a new poll that indicates that the vast majority of the Polish people are interested in tackling climate change and how climate change must be addressed. Now, Poland has hosted 3 COPs. That's a record in itself for any country. And now is focusing on low-emission concepts and technologies such as electromobility, which had a declaration yesterday, and while they are trying to maintain energy security with traditional sources of energy, and at the same time trying to address labor-related issues. And they are showing willingness to embrace a just transition. So what advice would you like to give to Poland? Or perhaps what advice did you give or would you like to give to the Polish presidency in balancing these challenging interests?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to thank Poland and the city of Katowice and the region of Silesia for hosting these 22,000 people in such a warm and friendly and hospitable way. I've been very impressed with all of the arrangements they have made, and I know everyone is grateful for that. And of course, Poland, and particularly Silesia, is in a situation that's familiar to people in many regions around the world. Coal and fossil fuels have provided jobs and have fueled economic progress for so long, and yet now we see the dire consequences of continuing to dump this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. And simultaneously, people have come to understand that air pollution is the new smoking. And with the new 2.5 parts per million monitors that people are buying, they're very cheap and they're connected to the internet, and they're raising awareness of the deadly health consequences of breathing in all the conventional air pollution that is produced at the same time the global warming pollution is produced. And people are rightly demanding that they have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. And the fact that 69% of the citizens of Poland are now telling these surveys they want a phase out of coal is very impressive in a country that still gets 80% of its electricity from coal. But I think it's a sign of things to come, things that are already unfolding, changes taking place all over the world. We see it in China, with the government of China responding to the Chinese people who are saying, we want our children to breathe clean air. We're now seeing it in India, where the recent surge in coal burning pushed many people across the tipping point where they say, no, this can't work. And countries that want to attract their diasporas to come back from universities overseas and apply their talents and knowledge and skill to boost their home economies are finding that these immigrants don't want to come back if their children suffer and if their families have health problems. So my advice, for what it's worth, would be accelerate the transition, because coal is now in danger of becoming a stranded asset almost everywhere. One of the fundamental realities of our modern time is that the cost of electricity from the sun and the wind is cheaper than electricity from fossil fuels in many geographies around the world. And because the cost continues to come down, like computer chips and flat screen TVs, it will be cheaper in almost all places throughout the world. As that begins to happen, then an asset becomes a stranded asset, an asset becomes a liability, and the opportunity to get ahead of that curve and make local businesses and industries competitive with the cheapest electricity possible, and at the same time give people, families, children clean air to breathe and clean water to drink, that's a choice that I think wise leaders would choose.
Thank you, sir. Like many others, you sounded an alarm bell many years ago on climate change. I think you started your journey more than 40 years ago. Probably many people weren't born at that time who are standing here. And has undoubtedly contributed to raising awareness among the people about climate change. And it led to actions from civil society and also from government. Many people are doing the right thing every day. Yet the news is dire and the situation is urgent. And the most recent IPCC and WWF reports highlight that very well and warn that we are running out of time. Now I'd like to ask you, what is it that gives you hope? And what inspires you to keep pushing for sustainable solutions?
Well, I think as more people become aware that the climate crisis is truly a global emergency, that it poses an existential threat to the future of humanity, then the mobilization in favor of solutions begins to increase dramatically. I see that happening around the world, particularly with some of the young people who are so prominent here at this conference. The younger generation is demanding a better future and a more hopeful and prosperous and cleaner and safer, more equitable future. And one of the keys to achieving that is to accelerate this sustainability revolution that is now underway. We're seeing a decoupling of economic growth and emissions growth. With the Internet of Things and machine learning and artificial intelligence, big data, supercomputers, business teams are now acquiring the ability to manage electrons and atoms and molecules with the same precision that the IT companies have demonstrated in managing bits of information. This is the future. This sustainability revolution has the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but the speed of the digital revolution. And that brings me hope. But more than that, what brings me hope is the activism and the passion of grassroots campaigners and activists in countries all over the world. They're not slowing down, they're just getting started. Their numbers are growing. Their knowledge of how to influence decision making is becoming deeper every day. And we have faced challenges in the past in human history where advocates of change felt at times a temptation to despair, but as they kept going and gathering more who agreed with them, they finally arrived at a tipping point. I quoted a poet yesterday, Wallace Stevens, who wrote in the U.S. in the last century, and he wrote the lines, after the last no comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends. In the movement to abolish slavery, to give women the right to vote and equality more generally, the civil rights movement in my country, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and globally, more recently marriage equality, gay and lesbian rights, all of these seemed impossible at times. But when enough people focused on the underlying choice, which is a choice between right and wrong, then because of who we are as human beings, the outcome became inevitable. And then we pushed over the barriers of the past toward a more just and sustainable future.
Thank you so much, sir. It's an honor to have you here, and thank you for your valuable time this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the interview. Thank you.